The gunshot that killed her father still echoed in Rebecca Morgan's ears as she stumbled through the cottonwood trees toward the rushing water of the Pecos River, her cotton dress torn at the hem and her dark hair falling loose from its pins. She collapsed on the muddy bank where the willows bent low over the current, pressing her hands against her face as the sobs finally broke free from her chest. The September sun beat down on New Mexico territory with relentless heat, but Rebecca felt cold all the way through to her bones. 3 hours ago, she had watched her father take his last breath on the dusty floor of their homestead, shot down by rustlers who wanted the small herd of cattle he had spent 5 years building. 3 hours ago, her entire world had shattered like glass dropped on stone. The sound of the river should have been soothing, but instead it reminded her of how alone she was. Her mother had died bringing her into this world 22 years ago, and now her father was gone too. She had no siblings, no close relatives, and the homestead was 20 miles from the nearest town of San Miguel. The rustlers had taken everything of value except the old mare in the barn and the clothes on Rebecca's back. She had nothing and no one. Rebecca did not hear the footsteps approaching through the grass until they stopped a few feet behind her. She stiffened, her heart hammering with sudden fear, but she was too exhausted to run. If the rustlers had come back to finish what they started, then perhaps it was for the best. She had nowhere to go and no way to survive out here alone, but the footsteps did not come closer. Instead, after a long moment, she heard the soft sound of someone settling onto the ground nearby. Not threatening, not demanding, just present. Rebecca slowly lowered her hands from her face and turned her head to see a man sitting about 6 feet away from her, his back against a cottonwood tree, his long legs stretched out in front of him. He was tall and lean, maybe 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and dark brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy, dusty denim pants, a faded blue shirt, worn leather boots, and a hat that had seen better days resting on his knee. His face was handsome in a rough way, with strong features and a few days' worth of stubble on his jaw. But what struck Rebecca most were his eyes, a striking shade of gray-green that seemed to see everything without judgment. He was not looking at her. Instead, he gazed out at the river, his expression calm and thoughtful, as if he had simply decided to rest here and had no particular interest in the weeping woman a few feet away. There was something deeply respectful in his silence, something that said he would not intrude on her grief, but neither would he leave her completely alone. Rebecca found herself staring at him, confused and wary. "Who are you?" she finally asked, her voice hoarse from crying. The cowboy did not answer immediately. He picked up a smooth stone from the ground beside him and turned it over in his calloused fingers, studying it as if it held great significance. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and gentle with the hint of a Texas drawl. "Just passing through." "Saw your place back there, saw what happened." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. "The rustlers, they killed my father, I know." He tossed the stone into the river and watched the ripples spread across the surface. "I am sorry for your loss." The simple statement, delivered without flowery words or empty platitudes, somehow meant more than any lengthy condolence could have. Rebecca felt fresh tears spilling down her cheeks, but they were different now, not the harsh, tearing sobs of before, but something quieter and deeper. They sat in silence for a long time. The cowboy did not try to comfort her or tell her everything would be fine. He did not ask questions or offer advice. He simply sat there, solid and steady as the cottonwood tree at his back, letting his presence speak the words that could not be said. There was something healing in that silence, something that told Rebecca she was not completely alone in the world, not yet. The sun moved across the sky and the shadows began to lengthen. Rebecca gradually became aware of practical concerns pushing through the fog of her grief. She had no food, no money, no way to bury her father properly. The homestead was a crime scene, and she had no idea if the rustlers would return. She needed to think to plan, but her mind felt like it was moving through thick mud. I do not know what to do, she whispered, more to herself than to the stranger. The cowboy finally turned to look at her directly. His gray-green eyes were kind but serious. First thing is to get your father properly laid to rest, then we need to get you somewhere safe. Those men might come back. Rebecca repeated, surprised. I cannot leave you out here alone, he said simply. Would not be right. You do not even know me. Does not matter. He stood up in one fluid motion and extended his hand to her. Name is James Carpenter. Most folks call me Carpenter. I work cattle runs between Texas and New Mexico, but I have got some time before I need to be anywhere particular. Rebecca looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. Every instinct told her not to trust strange men, especially out here in the wild territory where law was scarce and danger was common. But something in James Carpenter's steady gaze and quiet demeanor made her feel that he was a man of his word. She reached out and took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. Rebecca Morgan, she said, thank you for sitting with me. I needed that more than I knew. James nodded and released her hand. We should head back before dark. I will help you with what needs doing. They walked back through the cottonwood grove toward the homestead. Rebecca's legs felt weak and unsteady, but she forced herself to keep moving. James walked beside her, not too close but near enough that she felt his protective presence. He moved like someone who was comfortable in wild places, alert but not anxious, ready for anything. The homestead came into view as they crested a small rise. It was a modest place, a two-room cabin that her father had built with his own hands, a small barn, a corral, and a few outbuildings. Rebecca's father lay where he had fallen, just outside the barn door. The rustlers had left him there like he was nothing, like his life had no value at all. Rebecca stopped walking, unable to make herself go any closer. James glanced at her and seemed to understand. Wait here, he said gently. I will take care of it. She wanted to protest, to say that she should be the one to tend to her father, but the words would not come. Instead, she sank down onto a patch of grass and watched as James approached the body. He moved with respect and care, treating her father's remains with a dignity that made Rebecca's throat tighten with gratitude. James found a shovel in the barn and spent the next 2 hours digging a grave in the small plot where Rebecca's mother was already buried. He worked steadily in the fading light, never complaining or rushing. When the grave was ready, he wrapped her father's body in a blanket and carefully lowered it into the ground. Only then did he come to get Rebecca. She knelt beside the grave, her hand on the earth, and said a prayer for her father's soul. James stood nearby with his hat in his hands, his head bowed respectfully. When Rebecca finished, he filled in the grave and marked it with a simple wooden cross fashioned from scrap lumber. He was a good man, Rebecca said softly, staring at the fresh-turned earth. He never hurt anyone, he just wanted to build something for us, something that would last. Then he succeeded, James said. He built a daughter who has his strength. Rebecca looked up at him, surprised. You do not know if I am strong. You are still standing. That is strength enough. The stars were coming out now, bright and countless in the darkening sky. James checked the cabin and the barn, making sure the rustlers had not left any unpleasant surprises. The horses were gone except for Rebecca's old mare, and most of the supplies had been taken. But the cabin itself was intact, and there was still some food in the larder. James built a fire in the hearth while Rebecca sat at the rough wooden table, staring at nothing. She felt hollowed out, like something essential had been scooped out of her chest. James found cornmeal and salt pork and made a simple meal, setting a plate in front of her. You need to eat, he said. I am not hungry. Eat anyway. You will need your strength for what comes next. Rebecca picked up her fork mechanically and forced herself to take a few bites. The food tasted like sawdust, but she knew James was right. She could not afford to fall apart completely, not yet. What will you do now? James asked, settling into the chair across from her with his own plate. I do not know, Rebecca admitted. The homestead is mine, I suppose, but I cannot work it alone. And even if I could, I have no livestock left to speak of, just old Maisie in the barn. You have family anywhere? No, my mother died when I was born and my father was an only child. His parents passed years ago. Rebecca pushed her food around on her plate. I have some friends in San Miguel, but none close enough to impose on for long. I suppose I could try to find work there, maybe as a seamstress or a cook. James was quiet for a moment, considering. The land is worth something, even without livestock. You could sell it. My father loved this place. He built it from nothing. Rebecca felt tears threatening again. Selling it feels like erasing him. Then do not sell, James said simply. But you cannot stay here alone, not with rustlers in the area who know there is an unprotected woman on this land. The reality of her situation crashed down on Rebecca with new weight. James was right. Even if she could somehow manage to work the homestead alone, she would be vulnerable to every outlaw and drifter who passed through. Her father had been armed and experienced, and they had still killed him. What chance did she have? Come with me to San Miguel tomorrow, James continued. You can stay there while you figure out your next move. It is not safe here. Rebecca wanted to argue, but she could not. Everything James said made perfect sense, even though the thought of leaving her home made her feel like she was abandoning her father's memory. But her father would not have wanted her to die trying to hold onto a piece of land. He would have wanted her to survive, to build a new life somehow. All right, she finally agreed. We will leave in the morning. James nodded. I will sleep in the barn, keep watch. You lock the door and try to rest. Thank you, Rebecca said, meeting his eyes. I do not know why you are helping me, but I am grateful. No need for thanks, James replied, standing up. Just doing what is right. After he left for the barn, Rebecca cleaned up the dishes and prepared for bed. She lay in the small room that had been hers since childhood, listening to the familiar sounds of the homestead at night. The wind in the eaves, the creak of old wood, the distant call of a coyote. Tomorrow she would leave this place, and she had no idea if she would ever return. Sleep came fitfully, full of dark dreams and sudden wakings. Each time she jolted awake, heart pounding, she remembered that James was outside keeping watch, and somehow that made it possible to drift off again. Morning came too soon and not soon enough. Rebecca rose with the sun and packed what few belongings she could carry. Clothes, her mother's Bible, a few keepsakes that meant everything and nothing. She left most of the furniture and household goods, hoping that perhaps she would find a way to come back for them someday, though in her heart she doubted it. James was already up, checking over old Maisie and preparing her for the journey. He had his own horse tethered nearby, a handsome buckskin gelding with intelligent eyes. Rebecca noticed that James moved with practiced efficiency, every action deliberate and sure. Ready? He asked when she emerged from the cabin with her small bundle of possessions. Rebecca took one last look at the homestead, memorizing every detail. The cabin where she had grown up, the garden plot where she and her father had grown vegetables, the corral where he had broken wild horses. All of it was part of her, woven into her soul. As ready as I will ever be. James helped her onto Maisie's back and handed up her bundle. He swung onto his own horse with easy grace and pointed them toward the road to San Miguel. They rode in silence for the first hour, giving Rebecca space to grieve. The New Mexico landscape stretched out around them, harsh and beautiful in equal measure. Scrub brush and rocky hills, distant mountains purple against the horizon, and sky so blue it almost hurt to look at. How long have you been a cowboy? Rebecca asked eventually, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own dark thoughts. Since I was 15, James replied. My father had a small ranch in Texas, but he died of fever when I was young. My mother remarried, and my stepfather and I did not see eye to eye. So I left to make my own way. That must have been hard. It was. But I learned a lot, became good at what I do. I have worked on some of the biggest ranches in Texas and New Mexico. Saved most of my pay, figured someday I might buy some land of my own, start my own operation. Do you miss having a home? James was quiet for a moment. Sometimes. The cowboy life is a good one in many ways. You are free, you see the country, you are your own man, but it can be lonely too. No roots, no one waiting for you at the end of the day. Rebecca understood that loneliness all too well now. I thought I would always have my father. I thought we would work the homestead together until I married, and then my husband and I would take it over and care for my father in his old age. I had it all planned out in my head. Life does not usually follow the plans we make, James said. I learned that early. They stopped to rest the horses near midday, sitting in the shade of a rocky outcropping. James shared some dried beef and hard biscuits from his saddlebag, and they drank water from a canteen. The heat was oppressive, shimmering off the ground in visible waves. "Can I ask you something?" Rebecca said, watching James as he checked his horse's hooves for stones. "Sure." "Why did you really stop yesterday? At the river, I mean. You could have just ridden on." James straightened up and met her gaze. "I heard the gunshots earlier in the day, heard them from a couple miles off. By the time I got to your place, the rustlers were gone and your father was already dead. I saw you run toward the river, and I figured you needed some time before I approached. So I waited a bit, then followed to make sure you were all right." "But why?" Rebecca pressed. "You did not know me, you had no obligation." "Maybe not," James admitted. "But I was raised to believe that when you see someone hurting, someone in need, you help if you can. My mother taught me that, and I have tried to live by it. Besides," he added with a slight smile, "I know what it is like to lose everything and feel like you are drowning. Someone helped me once when I needed it. Figure I owe it to pass that along." Rebecca felt something shift in her chest, a tiny crack in the wall of grief that had surrounded her heart. "Who helped you?" "Old rancher named Tom Mackenzie. I was 17, broke, had not eaten in 3 days. I was trying to steal food from his supply wagon when he caught me. But instead of having me arrested or beating me, he sat me down and gave me a meal. Then he offered me a job. I worked for him for 5 years, learned everything I know about cattle and horses from him. He became like a father to me." "What happened to him?" "He retired, sold his ranch, moved to California to be near his daughter. Last I heard, he is doing well. We still write letters sometimes." They remounted and continued toward San Miguel. The landscape gradually changed as they descended from the higher country, becoming slightly greener as they approached the Pecos River Valley. Rebecca found herself stealing glances at James as they rode. He was a puzzle to her, this quiet cowboy who had appeared at her darkest moment and offered help without expecting anything in return. In her experience, most men wanted something, whether it was money or land or other things she did not want to think about. But James seemed content to simply be helpful, to do what needed doing and then move on. It was attractive in a way she had not expected. Not just his physical appearance, though she had to admit he was handsome in his rough, weathered way. But more the sense of integrity that surrounded him, the feeling that he was a man who kept his word and did what he thought was right even when no one was watching. Rebecca caught herself in that line of thinking and pushed it away firmly. Her father had been dead less than 2 days. She had no business thinking about any man in that way, least of all a drifting cowboy she had just met. Her life was in ruins, and she needed to focus on survival, not on attractive gray-green eyes and quiet strength. They reached San Miguel as the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. It was a modest town, maybe 300 people, with a main street lined with businesses and a church at the far end. Wooden sidewalks fronted the buildings, and horses were tied at various hitching posts. People moved about their business, calling greetings to each other, going in and out of the general store and the saloon. Rebecca had been here many times with her father, selling eggs and buying supplies. It had always felt like a bustling, exciting place compared to the isolated homestead. Now it just felt overwhelming and strange, full of people who had no idea that her entire world had fallen apart. James guided them to a modest boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. She was a kind-faced woman in her 50s who had always treated Rebecca and her father well. When James explained the situation, leaving out his own role and simply saying that Rebecca had suffered a tragedy and needed a place to stay. Mrs. Patterson immediately swept Rebecca into a motherly embrace. "Oh, you poor dear," she said, her voice thick with sympathy. "Of course you can stay here. Do not even think about payment right now, we will sort all that out later." Rebecca felt tears threatening again at this unexpected kindness. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson, I do not know how long I will need to stay." "As long as necessary, dear. Come, let me show you to a room." James carried Rebecca's bundle upstairs and set it on the bed in a small but clean room overlooking the main street. Mrs. Patterson bustled around, checking that everything was in order, promising to bring up hot water for washing and a good dinner later. When she left, Rebecca turned to James. "What about you? Where will you stay?" "I will find a spot," James said. "Maybe the livery or just camp outside town." "That does not seem fair. You have done so much for me and I have nothing to offer in return." "I do not want anything in return," James said firmly. "I helped because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected payment." Rebecca bit her lip, frustrated by her own helplessness. "Will you at least let me buy you dinner? I have a little money my father kept hidden in the cabin. I brought it with me." James hesitated, and Rebecca could see him considering whether to refuse, but finally he nodded. All right, dinner would be nice. They met an hour later in the small dining room of the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson had outdone herself, producing fried chicken, mashed potatoes, greens, and fresh bread. Rebecca discovered that she was actually hungry for the first time since the tragedy. Perhaps it was the relief of being somewhere safe, or perhaps it was simply that her body was demanding fuel after days of shock and grief. James ate with the efficient appetite of a man who was used to irregular meals. They talked about small things, carefully avoiding the painful topics. James told her stories about cattle drives, about the huge herds that moved from Texas to railheads in Kansas, about storms on the open prairie and river crossings that could turn deadly in an instant. Rebecca found herself fascinated by this life she had never known, this world of constant movement and adventure. "It sounds exciting," she said, "but also dangerous." "It can be both," James agreed. "Lost a friend to a stampede 3 years ago. Best rider I ever knew, but a lightning strike spooked the herd and he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. That is the reality of the work. It can turn bad in a heartbeat. Do you ever think about doing something else?" "Sometimes. Like I said, I have been saving money. I have almost enough to buy some land, start my own small operation. Maybe find a woman who would be willing to share that life." He smiled slightly. "Though I admit, most women take one look at a drifting cowboy and decide they want nothing to do with that kind of uncertainty." "Maybe you are looking at the wrong women," Rebecca said, and then blushed, surprised at her own boldness. James looked at her with those steady gray-green eyes, and Rebecca felt something pass between them, something warm and promising that made her heart beat faster. But then he looked away, his expression becoming carefully neutral. "You have had a hard few days," he said gently. "You should get some rest." Rebecca knew he was right, but she was also disappointed. She was not ready for the evening to end, not ready to be alone with her grief again. But James was already standing, putting his hat back on, preparing to leave. "Thank you for dinner," he said. "And for the company." "Where will you go?" "Livery stable. They will let me sleep in the hay loft for a few coins. I have done it plenty of times before." "When will I see you again?" James paused at the door. "I will be around for a few days. Need to check in with the sheriff about what happened at your place, see if he has any leads on those rustlers. I will stop by tomorrow, make sure you are settling in all right." After he left, Rebecca climbed the stairs to her little room and lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She should be thinking about her future, about how she would support herself and what she would do with the homestead. But instead, she found herself thinking about James Carpenter, about the way he had sat beside her by the river and let the silence say everything that words could not, about the kindness in his eyes and the strength in his hands, about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, Something good could still come from all this darkness. She fell asleep with that thought. And for the first time since her father's death, her dreams were not entirely filled with nightmares. The next morning, Rebecca woke to sunshine streaming through the window and the sounds of the town coming to life below. For just a moment, she forgot where she was and why. Then it all came rushing back, hitting her like a physical blow. Her father was dead. The homestead was abandoned. Her entire life had been upended. She dressed slowly, choosing a simple blue calico dress that her father had bought her last Christmas. It felt strange to be wearing it now, strange to think that he would never see her wear it again. Rebecca braided her hair carefully and went downstairs to find Mrs. Patterson setting out breakfast for her boarders. "Good morning, dear," Mrs. Patterson said warmly. "Did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Rebecca admitted. "Thank you again for taking me in." "Nonsense." "You are welcome here as long as you need." Mrs. Patterson poured her a cup of coffee. "Now, I have been thinking about your situation. My sister runs the dress shop here in town, and she is always looking for someone who can sew. If you have any skill with a needle, I am sure she would be happy to give you work." The offer was so practical and kind that Rebecca felt tears pricking her eyes again. "I can sew. My father taught me to mend, and I made most of my own clothes. Perfect. I will take you over there after breakfast." Rebecca was just finishing her eggs when James appeared at the boarding house door. He had cleaned up, shaving off the stubble and brushing the worst of the dust from his clothes. He looked younger without the beard, and Rebecca realized he was probably not quite 30 after all, maybe 27 or 28. "Morning," he said, removing his hat. "Hope I am not intruding." "Not at all," Mrs. Patterson said before Rebecca could respond. "Come in, sit down." "Have you eaten?" "I do not want to impose." "You are not imposing. Any friend of Rebecca's is welcome at my table." James glanced at Rebecca, who nodded encouragingly. He settled into a chair across from her, and Mrs. Patterson brought him a plate of food that he accepted with genuine gratitude. Rebecca found herself watching him as he ate, noting the careful manners he must have learned somewhere along the way he thanked Mrs. Patterson for everything she brought him. "I talked to Sheriff Morrison this morning," James said between bites. "Told him what happened. He is going to ride out to your place this afternoon, see if he can pick up the rustlers' trail. I offered to go with him if he wants." "Do you think they will catch them?" Rebecca asked. "Hard to say. They have got a good head start and the territory is big, but Morrison is a good tracker. If anyone can find them, he can. I want to go with you." Both James and Mrs. Patterson looked at her in surprise. "Rebecca, I do not think that is a good idea," James said carefully. "It could be dangerous. It is my father who was killed. I deserve to be there to see justice done." "Justice and revenge are not the same thing," James said quietly. "And putting yourself in danger will not bring your father back." Rebecca knew he was right, but the thought of sitting safe in town while others dealt with her problems made her feel helpless and small. She had spent her whole life on that homestead, working alongside her father, learning to be tough and capable. She did not want to suddenly become a fragile flower who needed to be protected from reality, but before she could argue further, Mrs. Patterson spoke up. "Rebecca, I know this is hard. But James is right. The best thing you can do right now is start building your new life. Come with me to the dress shop. Talk to my sister about work. That is how you honor your father's memory, by surviving and moving forward." Rebecca wanted to protest, but she could see the wisdom in what Mrs. Patterson was saying. Her father had not died so she could throw away her own life chasing revenge. He had died trying to protect what was his, trying to build something lasting. The best way to honor that was to build something of her own. "All right," she finally said. "I will go to the dress shop." James looked relieved. "That is good. I will let you know what we find when we get back." He finished his breakfast and stood to leave, but Rebecca followed him to the door. "Be careful," she said softly. "Those men already killed once. I do not want you to be hurt because of me." "I will be careful," James promised. "I have been doing this kind of thing for a long time. I know how to handle myself." He settled his hat on his head and walked out into the morning sunlight. Rebecca watched him go, feeling an odd ache in her chest. She barely knew this man, but somehow the thought of him riding into danger made her afraid in a way she had not expected. Mrs. Patterson's sister, Helen, ran her dress shop with the same brisk efficiency that Mrs. Patterson brought to the boarding house. She was a practical woman in her late 40s, never married, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. She looked Rebecca over critically when Mrs. Patterson brought her in. "So you can sew?" Helen asked without preamble. "Yes, ma'am, I am not fancy, but I am careful and neat. Show me." Helen handed her a piece of fabric, a needle and thread. Rebecca threaded the needle and began working, creating a straight seam with small, even stitches. She was aware of Helen watching her every movement, but she did not let it make her nervous. She knew she was good at this. Her father had taught her to be patient and precise, to take pride in work well done. After a few minutes, Helen nodded. "That will do. I can use you for alterations and basic construction. I will pay you 50 cents a day to start, more if you prove you are worth it. You can start tomorrow." 50 cents a day was not much, but it was something. With careful management, Rebecca could pay Mrs. Patterson for room and board and maybe even save a little. It was a start, a foundation to build on. "Thank you," Rebecca said sincerely. "I appreciate the chance." "Do not thank me yet," Helen said dryly. "I work my girls hard, but I am fair and I pay on time. Show up at 8 o'clock sharp tomorrow morning." Rebecca left the shop feeling like she had taken the first real step toward a new life. It was not the life she had imagined, not the life she had wanted. But it was something, and right now, that was enough. She spent the rest of the day helping Mrs. Patterson around the boarding house, grateful to have something to do with her hands. She washed dishes and swept floors and changed linens on beds, losing herself in the simple physical labor. It was easier than thinking, easier than feeling. James and Sheriff Morrison returned just before sunset. Rebecca was in the kitchen helping Mrs. Patterson prepare dinner when she heard horses in the street outside. She wiped her hands on her apron and went to the door, her heart beating fast. James was dismounting in front of the boarding house, and Rebecca could tell from his expression that the news was not good. She waited while he tied his horse and climbed the steps to the porch. "We lost the trail about 10 miles north," he said without preamble. "They crossed a rocky stretch that did not hold tracks, and we could not pick it up again before dark. Morrison is going to try again tomorrow, but he is not hopeful." Rebecca felt a surge of anger and frustration. "So they just get away with it. My father is dead and there is no justice?" "I am sorry," James said, and she could see that he meant it. "Sometimes that is how it goes out here. The territory is big and bad men can disappear into it. It is not fair." "No, it is not." Rebecca wanted to scream, to rage against the unfairness of it all, but she had cried herself dry by the river and she had no tears left. Instead, she just felt hollow and defeated. James seemed to sense her mood. "Come walk with me," he said gently. "Just around the block, you need some air." Rebecca did not particularly want to walk, but she also did not want to stay inside where Mrs. Patterson would fuss over her with well-meaning sympathy. She nodded and followed James down the steps. They walked in silence for a while, moving through the quiet evening streets of San Miguel. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Somewhere a dog was barking and the sound of piano music drifted from the saloon on the main street. "I got a job today," Rebecca said eventually. "At the dress shop. I start tomorrow." "That is good," James said. "Helen is tough but fair. You will do well there. It is not much. But it is something." They had reached the edge of town now, where the buildings gave way to open land. James stopped walking and turned to face her. "Rebecca, I know this is hard. I know you are angry and hurting, but you are doing the right things. You are building something new. That takes courage." "I do not feel courageous. I feel scared and alone." "Being scared does not mean you are not brave. Brave is doing what needs doing even when you are terrified, and you are not alone." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I know we just met, and I know you have no reason to trust me, but I want to help you if you will let me." Rebecca looked up at him, at those steady gray-green eyes that seemed to see right through her walls. Why do you care what happens to me?" James was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and honest. "I do not know exactly. There is something about you, something I recognized from the moment I saw you by the river. A strength and a sadness, a determination to keep going even when everything is falling apart. I admire that. And I guess I would like to know you better if you are willing." Rebecca's heart was beating very fast now. She knew she should be cautious, should protect her battered heart from any more potential pain. But there was something in James that called to her, something that made her want to take a chance even though it scared her. "I would like that too," she said softly. James smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face and made him look younger and lighter. "Good. Then I will stick around town for a while, see if I can find some work. There is always need for someone who knows horses and cattle." They walked back to the boarding house slowly, not wanting the moment to end. When they reached the porch, James took off his hat and held it in his hands, suddenly looking uncertain. "I will see you tomorrow," he asked. "Yes, tomorrow." He nodded and turned to leave, but Rebecca reached out and touched his arm. He stopped, looking back at her in surprise. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For sitting with me by the river, for helping me with my father, for not leaving me alone. I know you did not have to do any of that." "Rebecca," James said, his voice rough with emotion, "I would do it all again in a heartbeat." He squeezed her hand briefly, then walked away into the gathering darkness. Rebecca stood on the porch for a long time, watching the stars come out one by one, feeling something like hope stirring in her chest for the first time in days. The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that was strange and new, but not entirely unpleasant. Rebecca worked long days at the dress shop, learning the intricacies of fitting and altering garments for the women of San Miguel. Helen was demanding but patient, showing Rebecca techniques she had never learned and gradually trusting her with more complex projects. James found work at the livery stable and at a small ranch just outside town that needed help breaking horses. He was good at it, patient and firm in equal measure, and soon he had a reputation as someone who could gentle even the most difficult animals. He stopped by the boarding house most evenings, and he and Rebecca would take walks or sit on the porch talking about everything and nothing. Rebecca found herself looking forward to those evenings more than she wanted to admit. James was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor that could make her laugh even on her hardest days. He told her stories about his travels, about the places he had seen, and the people he had met. In turn, Rebecca told him about growing up on the homestead, about her father's dreams for their future, about her mother whom she had never known but whose presence had always been felt in the stories her father told. Slowly, carefully, they were building something between them. Not rushing, not pushing, just letting it grow naturally like a seed planted in good soil. Rebecca was grateful for James's patience. She was still grieving her father, still adjusting to her new life, and she needed time to heal before she could fully open her heart to anyone. But she could feel herself healing, bit by bit. The sharp edge of grief was slowly dulling into a manageable ache. She still missed her father terribly, still had moments when the loss hit her like a wave. But she was learning to swim through those moments instead of being pulled under by them. One evening in late October, almost 2 months after her father's death, James arrived at the boarding house with news. Rebecca was on the porch mending one of Mrs. Patterson's tablecloths, enjoying the cool evening air after the heat of the day. "Sheriff Morrison caught one of the rustlers," James said without preamble. "Got him in a shootout near Santa Rosa. The man confessed to being part of the gang that hit your place." Rebecca set down her mending, her hands suddenly shaking. "What about the others? 2 of them are dead." "The 4th one got away, might have left the territory entirely. But the one Morrison caught is going to hang for murder. There will be a trial, but the outcome is not in doubt. He confessed to everything." Rebecca did not know how to feel. She had wanted justice for her father, had wanted the men who killed him to pay for what they had done. And now one of them would. But it did not bring her the satisfaction she had expected. It did not bring her father back or undo the pain of the last 2 months. "I thought I would feel different," she said quietly. "I thought I would feel relieved or vindicated or something, but I just feel empty." James sat down beside her on the porch steps. Revenge does not heal wounds, it just closes them. Healing is different, slower. "You are doing that work already." "Am I? Some days I feel like I am just going through the motions." "That is part of it. You keep going through the motions until one day you realize they are not motions anymore, they are just your life." Rebecca leaned her head on his shoulder, a gesture that had become comfortable and natural between them. James put his arm around her, and they sat in silence as the sun set and the first stars appeared. "I have been thinking," James said eventually. "There is a cattle drive leaving for Kansas next week. Big one, nearly 2,000 head. They are looking for experienced hands and the pay is good, real good." Rebecca felt her stomach drop. "You are leaving?" "I am thinking about it. The money would be enough to buy that land I have been wanting to really start my own operation. It is a good opportunity." "How long would you be gone?" 3 months, maybe 4. Depends on weather and how fast we can move the herd. 3 or 4 months, it might as well be a lifetime. Rebecca felt tears threatening, but she blinked them back fiercely. She had no claim on James, no right to ask him to stay. He had already done more for her than anyone could expect. If he wanted to pursue his dreams, she should be happy for him. "You should go," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It sounds like exactly what you need." James was quiet for a long moment. "What if I do not want to go? Why would you not? It is what you have been working toward." "Because," James said slowly, turning to look at her, "in the last 2 months I have found something I did not know I was looking for, and I am not sure I want to walk away from it." Rebecca's heart was pounding so hard she was sure James could feel it. "What did you find, you?" he said simply. "I found you." Rebecca did not know what to say. She had felt the growing connection between them, had known that her feelings for James were deepening into something real and powerful. But hearing him say it out loud, hearing him choose her over his dreams, was overwhelming. "James, I cannot ask you to give up your plans for me. You are not asking, I am choosing. There will be other cattle drives, other opportunities, but there is only one you, and I do not want to spend the next 4 months wondering what I am missing back here." "What are you saying?" James took her hand in his calloused fingers wrapping around hers with gentle strength. "I am saying that I am falling in love with you, Rebecca Morgan. I did not plan it, and I sure did not expect it, but it is happening anyway, and I do not want to fight it." Rebecca felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but for the first time in weeks, they were not tears of grief. They were tears of joy and relief and hope. "I am falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I did not think I could feel this way so soon after losing my father. I thought it was wrong somehow, disloyal." "Your father would want you to be happy," James said firmly. "He would want you to live your life, to find love and build a future. That is not disloyal. That is honoring his memory by doing what he raised you to do." Rebecca knew he was right. Her father had been a practical man who believed in moving forward, not looking back. He would have liked James, she thought. Would have respected his strength and honesty, his willingness to work hard and do the right thing. "So what do we do now?" she asked. James smiled. "We take it one day at a time. I will stay in San Miguel, keep working at the livery and the ranch. You keep working at the dress shop. We spend our evenings together and see where this goes. No rush, no pressure. Just 2 people getting to know each other and building something real." "I would like that," Rebecca said. "I would like that very much." James leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, but Rebecca did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, wanted to feel something other than grief and loss. When his lips met hers, gentle and tentative, she felt a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the autumn evening. The kiss was soft and sweet, full of promise but not demanding. When they pulled apart, James rested his forehead against hers. "I will take care of you," he said quietly. "I cannot promise everything will be perfect, but I can promise I will try my best to make you happy." "You already make me happy," Rebecca said, just by being here, by being you." They sat on the porch until the moon rose, talking and planning and dreaming together. Rebecca felt like she was waking up from a long nightmare into something beautiful and new. Her father was still gone, and that pain would never fully disappear. But she was learning that grief and joy could exist side by side, that she could mourn what she had lost while still embracing what she had found. Winter came to New Mexico with cold winds and occasional snow. Rebecca continued working at the dress shop, and her skills improved to the point where Helen gave her a raise and more responsibility. She was making enough now to pay her own way and even save a little. James had become a fixture in her life, as essential as breathing. They spent every free moment together, walking through town, having dinners at the boarding house, occasionally riding out to the countryside on their days off. James borrowed horses from the livery, and they would pack a lunch and spend whole afternoons exploring the area, talking about their hopes and dreams for the future. In December, as Christmas approached, James took Rebecca back to her old homestead. She had not been there since the day after her father's death, and she was nervous about seeing it again. But James thought it was important, and Rebecca trusted his judgment. The homestead looked smaller than she remembered, more vulnerable. The cabin still stood, but the windows were dirty and the door hung slightly crooked on its hinges. The barn was in better shape, still solid and weatherproof. The corral was empty, the gates standing open. Rebecca walked through the rooms of the cabin, remembering. Here was where her father had sat in the evenings, reading his Bible by lamplight. There was the kitchen where they had shared countless meals. This was her small bedroom where she had dreamed of her future, never imagining it would include a wandering cowboy with gray-green eyes and a heart of gold. "What do you want to do with this place?" James asked, watching her carefully. "I do not know. Sell it, I suppose. I cannot work it alone, and I do not think I could ever live here again. There are too many ghosts." James nodded slowly. "What if you did not have to work it alone?" Rebecca looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we worked it together? You and me building something here. We could start small, just a few head of cattle, some chickens, maybe a garden, work our way up slowly." "James, are you asking what I think you are asking?" James took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking nervous. "I know it is soon. I know we have only known each other a few months. But Rebecca, I am more sure of this than I have ever been of anything. I love you. I want to build a life with you, a real life with a home and a future. Will you marry me?" Rebecca's heart was so full she thought it might burst. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." James let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around in the dusty cabin. When he set her down, he kissed her with a passion that made her dizzy. "You have made me the happiest man in New Mexico," he said against her lips. "When?" Rebecca asked breathlessly. "Whenever you want." "Tomorrow, next month, next year. I am in no rush as long as I know you are mine." Rebecca thought about it. "Spring," she decided. "Let's get married in the spring when everything is new and growing. We can spend the winter getting the homestead ready, fixing it up, making it ours instead of just mine." "Spring it is," James agreed. "And Rebecca, I promise you this. I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of you. I will work hard and love you well and build something here that will last." "I know you will," Rebecca said, and she meant it. She had learned in the last few months that James Carpenter was a man who kept his promises. They spent the rest of the day at the homestead, making plans and taking inventory of what needed to be done. There was a lot of work ahead, but it did not feel daunting with James beside her. Together, they could do anything. When they rode back to San Miguel that evening, Rebecca felt lighter than she had in months. She was still sad about her father, and she suspected that sadness would always be part of her. But it was no longer the defining feature of her life. She had James now, and a future to look forward to, and that made all the difference. The winter passed quickly, filled with work and planning and quiet happiness. James spent his days working to save money for supplies they would need at the homestead. Rebecca continued at the dress shop but began making plans to leave in the spring after the wedding. Helen was sorry to lose her but understood, and she promised to send work Rebecca's way if she wanted to continue sewing from home. Mrs. Patterson was delighted by the engagement and insisted on hosting the wedding at the boarding house. She and Rebecca spent evenings planning the ceremony and the modest celebration that would follow. It would not be a large or fancy affair, just close friends and the few people in San Miguel who had become important to Rebecca in the months since her father's death. In February, James used his savings to buy 6 head of young cattle and a breeding pair of pigs. They were delivered to the homestead, where he had been spending his weekends repairing the barn and corral. He also bought chickens and set up a coop, envisioning fresh eggs and eventually meat. Rebecca came out to help whenever she could, and they worked side by side, rebuilding what had been lost. The cabin needed the most work. They repaired the door and cleaned the windows, patched holes in the walls, and fixed the roof where it had started to leak. Rebecca made new curtains and cushions, transforming the spare interior into something that felt like a real home. They moved her father's furniture around, adding pieces that James found at auctions or built himself. Slowly, the homestead stopped being a place of grief and became a place of hope. On a warm day in April, with wildflowers blooming across the New Mexico hills, Rebecca Morgan married James Carpenter in the parlor of Mrs. Patterson's boarding house. Rebecca wore a dress she had made herself, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. James wore his best clothes, his dark hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaven. The ceremony was performed by the town minister, a kind old man who had known Rebecca's father. He spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through good times and bad. Rebecca and James stood hand in hand, looking into each other's eyes, and said their vows with voices that did not waver. I, James, take you, Rebecca, to be my wife. I promise to love you and cherish you, to work beside you and support you, to be faithful and true all the days of my life. I, Rebecca, take you, James, to be my husband. I promise to love you and cherish you, to work beside you and support you, to be faithful and true all the days of my life. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, James kissed Rebecca with such tenderness that several of the watching guests wiped tears from their eyes. Rebecca felt like her heart might burst with happiness. After all the darkness of the last year, she had found light again in the most unexpected place. The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. Mrs. Patterson had prepared a feast, and there was music and dancing. Helen gave them a beautiful quilt she had made as a wedding gift. Sheriff Morrison, who had become a friend over the months, gave them a bottle of good whiskey. Others brought practical gifts, dishes and tools and seed for planting. As the sun set, James and Rebecca said their goodbyes and rode out to the homestead, to the life they would build together. They had decided to spend their wedding night there, in the cabin that was now truly theirs. The cabin was clean and warm, with a fire burning in the hearth and candles lit on the table. Rebecca felt suddenly nervous, very aware that they were truly married now, that this was the beginning of their life together as husband and wife. But James seemed to sense her nerves. He took her hands and kissed them gently. "We do not have to do anything you are not ready for," he said softly. "We have all the time in the world." Rebecca looked up at him, at this good, patient man who had walked into her life at its darkest moment and brought light. "I am ready," she said. "I want this, I want you." James kissed her then, deep and passionate, and Rebecca felt all her nervousness melt away. This was right. This was where she was meant to be, in his arms, in this home, building this life. Their first night together as husband and wife was tender and passionate, full of discovery and joy. Afterward, lying in James's arms in the bed they would share for the rest of their lives, Rebecca felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. She had lost so much, but she had gained something precious beyond measure. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," James whispered back. "Always." The years that followed were not always easy, but they were good. James and Rebecca worked the homestead together, slowly building their herd and improving the land. It was hard work, dawn to dusk most days, but they did it side by side, and that made all the difference. In the spring of 1877, Rebecca discovered she was expecting their first child. The pregnancy was difficult, with morning sickness that lasted well into the 4th month and aches and pains that made work challenging. But James was endlessly patient, taking on extra chores and fussing over Rebecca until she laughingly told him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. Their son was born in December, delivered by a midwife from San Miguel, with James pacing nervously outside. He was a healthy, loud baby with James's dark hair and Rebecca's brown eyes. They named him Thomas, after her father, and James cried when he held his son for the first time. "He is perfect," James said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are perfect. I cannot believe how lucky I am." "We are lucky," Rebecca corrected, gazing at her new family with love. "We found each other when we both needed it most." Thomas was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Emma, who had Rebecca's delicate features and her father's adventurous spirit. Then came another son, Samuel, who was quiet and thoughtful from the start. Their family was growing, and with it, the homestead was growing too. By 1882, they had a respectable herd of cattle, several horses, pigs, chickens, and a large garden that provided most of their food. They had expanded the cabin, adding 2 more rooms to accommodate their growing family. James had become known throughout the area as an honest, hard-working rancher, and Rebecca's reputation as a seamstress meant she always had work when she wanted it. But more than the material success, they had built something lasting and real. Their love had deepened over the years, weathering challenges and celebrations alike. They had learned each other's rhythms and quirks, had figured out how to work together and support each other. They were partners in every sense of the word. On a September evening in 1884, almost exactly 9 years after James had found Rebecca crying by the river, they sat on the porch of their home watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was nearly 7 now, already helping with the cattle. Emma was 5, full of energy and questions. Samuel was 3, toddling after his older siblings. "Do you ever think about that day?" Rebecca asked, leaning against James's shoulder. "The day we met." "All the time," James admitted. "I think about how close I came to just riding by, minding my own business. And then I think about everything I would have missed. I was so lost that day, so sure that my life was over, that there was nothing left worth living for. And now." Rebecca looked at her children, at the home she and James had built, at the land that had been her father's dream and was now theirs. "Now I know that endings can be beginnings, that the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures. I lost my father, and that will always hurt. But I found you, and I found this life, and I would not trade it for anything." James kissed the top of her head. "You know what I remember most about that day? The silence, how we sat there by the river, and I did not know what to say, so I just sat with you. Let the silence say everything I could not put into words." "It was exactly what I needed," Rebecca said. "Someone who did not try to fix everything or tell me it would be okay, someone who just stayed." "I will always stay," James promised. "Through everything I will stay." And he did. They built a life that lasted, raised their children to be strong and kind, watched their grandchildren grow. The homestead thrived under their care, becoming one of the most respected ranches in the territory. When New Mexico became a state in 1912, James and Rebecca were in their 60s, still working the land they loved, still devoted to each other after more than 3 decades of marriage. Their children had grown and some had moved away, but the family remained close, gathering for holidays and celebrations. Thomas had followed in his father's footsteps, becoming a rancher. Emma had married a doctor and moved to Santa Fe, but she visited often. Samuel had surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, settling in San Miguel and educating the next generation. Rebecca often thought about her father during those later years, wondering what he would think of the life she had built. She liked to believe he would be proud, that he would see how she had taken the tragedy of his death and turned it into something beautiful and lasting. On warm evenings, she and James still sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they had worked so hard to cultivate. They did not talk as much as they used to, but they did not need to. After so many years together, they could communicate in silence, in the touch of hands and the comfort of presence. "You have any regrets?" Rebecca asked James one evening in 1915 as they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. James thought about it for a long moment. "Only one," he finally said. "What is that?" "I wish I had more years ahead with you. 40 is not enough. 100 would not be enough." Rebecca felt tears in her eyes, but they were happy tears. "We have been blessed, James, more than most people ever are. We found each other when we both needed saving, and we built something real and lasting. Our children are happy and healthy. Our grandchildren are thriving." "What more could we ask for?" "Nothing," James agreed. "You are right. We have everything that matters." They held hands in the fading light, two people who had found each other at the worst possible moment and turned it into the best possible life. Rebecca thought back to that day by the river, when she had been so certain that her world had ended. She remembered the sound of footsteps behind her, the presence of a stranger who sat down and said nothing, who let the silence speak for him. That silence had said more than words ever could. It had said, "You are not alone." It had said, "I see your pain." It had said, "I will stay with you through this." And most importantly, though neither of them knew it at the time, it had said, "This is where our story begins." From that single moment of shared silence had grown a love that lasted a lifetime. From that single act of compassion had come a family, a home, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Rebecca squeezed James's hand, and he squeezed back. No words were needed. After 40 years, they still understood the language of silence, still knew how to communicate in the space between words. The sun set slowly over the New Mexico landscape, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Inside the house, their children and grandchildren laughed and talked, celebrating the anniversary of the couple who had shown them what real love looked like. But on the porch, Rebecca and James sat in comfortable silence, holding hands and watching the day fade into night. It was not the end, not yet. They had more years ahead, more sunsets to watch, more moments to share. But even when the end did come, Rebecca knew she would face it without fear. Because she had learned on that terrible, wonderful day by the river that endings and beginnings were often the same thing, that loss and love could exist side by side, and that sometimes the greatest gifts came wrapped in the darkest moments. James had found her crying by the river. He had sat beside her and let the silence say everything. And from that silence had come a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of compassion, patience, and staying when it would have been easier to walk away. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars began to emerge one by one, Rebecca rested her head on James's shoulder and thought about how far they had come. From grief to joy, from despair to hope, from endings to new beginnings. It had been a long journey, and it was not over yet. But whatever came next, they would face it together. Just as they had faced everything else for the past 4 decades. Hand in hand, heart to heart, building a life one day at a time, the river still flowed where they had first met, winding through the cottonwoods and willows. Sometimes on quiet afternoons, they would ride out there together, dismounting to sit on the bank where their story had begun. They did not talk much on those visits. They did not need to. The silence said everything. Years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons changing. By 1918, James and Rebecca were both in their early 60s, their hair now streaked with silver but their love as strong as ever. The ranch had been partially turned over to Thomas, who ran the day-to-day operations while James advised and helped when he could. Rebecca had slowed down her sewing work, focusing instead on quilting and teaching her granddaughters the skills she had learned over a lifetime. She found joy in passing on her knowledge, in watching young fingers learn to create beauty from scraps of fabric. Emma had given them 4 grandchildren, all living in Santa Fe but visiting regularly. Samuel had 3 children who Rebecca saw often since they lived right in San Miguel. Thomas and his wife had blessed them with 5 grandchildren who lived on the ranch itself, filling the homestead with the sounds of children's laughter just as it had been filled decades before. The world was changing rapidly. The Great War had ended, bringing relief and joy to families across America. Automobiles were becoming more common, though James still preferred horses. Electric lights were being installed in some of the bigger towns, though the homestead still relied on oil lamps and candles. But through all the changes in the world around them, James and Rebecca remained constant. Their love was a fixed point, steady and sure, anchoring not just themselves but their entire family. In the spring of 1920, they organized a large family gathering to celebrate Rebecca's 65th birthday. All 3 of their children came with their families, filling the expanded homestead with noise and activity. There were 12 grandchildren now, ranging in age from 20 down to 3 and 1 great-grandchild on the way. They roasted a pig and made mountains of food. There was music and dancing, stories and laughter. Rebecca sat in a chair of honor, watching her family with a heart so full it ached. This is what her father had wanted for her, she realized. This abundance of love and life, this legacy that would continue long after she was gone. James caught her eye from across the yard where he was playing with some of the younger grandchildren, and he smiled at her with such love that she felt like she was 22 again, standing at the altar in Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, promising to love him all the days of her life. She had kept that promise. Through good years and hard years, through births and deaths, through success and struggle, she had loved him with everything she had. And he had loved her the same way, with unwavering devotion and steadfast commitment. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, James and Rebecca walked out to the corral under a sky full of stars. The night was cool and clear, and they could hear cattle lowing softly in the distance. "Hard to believe we built all this," James said, leaning on the fence rail. "Sometimes I still feel like that drifting cowboy with nothing but a horse and a dream." "You built this," Rebecca corrected. "You took a broken homestead and a broken woman and made something beautiful out of both." "We built it together," James insisted. "I just provided the muscle." "You provided the heart," Rebecca laughed softly. "I think we both provided plenty of both." They stood in comfortable silence for a while, just being together in the quiet night. After 45 years of marriage, they had perfected the art of being with each other without needing constant conversation. The silence between them was full of shared memories, shared experiences, shared love. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had just ridden on that day? Rebecca asked. "If you had not followed me to the river?" "All the time," James admitted. "But I always come to the same conclusion. I believe we were meant to find each other. Call it fate or God's plan or just dumb luck, but I do not think I could have kept riding even if I wanted to. Something drew me to you, something bigger than choice." "I used to think my life ended the day my father died," Rebecca said. "But really it began that day, or maybe it began the next day when you sat down beside me and did not say a word." "That silence was the smartest thing I ever did," James said with a slight smile. "Because I had no idea what to say, I was completely out of my depth. It was perfect, you were perfect." James turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. Even in the darkness, she could see the love shining in his eyes. "Rebecca Carpenter, you have made my life worth living. Every single day with you has been a gift. I hope you know that." "I do," Rebecca said softly. "Because you have done the same for me. You saved me, James." In every way a person can be saved. They kissed under the stars, 2 people who had grown old together but whose love remained young and vital. When they finally went inside to bed, they lay in each other's arms, comfortable and content. The 1920s brought more changes to the world. Women gained the right to vote, something Rebecca celebrated enthusiastically. Radios became common, bringing news and entertainment into homes across America. The economy boomed, and with it, the ranch prospered. But the greatest joy of those years was watching their grandchildren grow into fine young adults. They attended graduations and weddings, welcomed new great-grandchildren, and took pride in the success of the next generation. Thomas's oldest son, named James after his grandfather, decided to become a rancher and took over more of the operation. He had his grandfather's patience with animals and his grandmother's business sense, and under his leadership, the ranch expanded further. Emma's children pursued various careers in the city, but they always spoke fondly of summers spent on the ranch, learning to ride and work cattle under their grandfather's patient tutelage. Samuel's children inherited their father's love of learning, and two of them became teachers like him, carrying on his legacy of education and community service. In 1925, James and Rebecca celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with a massive gathering that brought together more than 70 family members. They renewed their vows in a simple ceremony by the river where they had met, coming full circle to the place where their story had begun. Standing on that bank with the water flowing past and their entire family watching, Rebecca felt a wave of emotion so powerful it nearly knocked her over. She looked at James, now 72 years old with silver hair and weathered skin, but still strong and vital, still the man who had sat beside her and let the silence speak when she needed it most. "I, Rebecca, renew my promise to you, James," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the quiet evening air. "I promise to love you and cherish you for whatever time we have left, to be grateful for every moment, to never take for granted the gift of our life together." "I, James, renew my promise to you, Rebecca," he replied. "I promise to love you and cherish you for whatever time we have left, to wake up every day grateful that you chose me, to spend every remaining moment showing you how much you mean to me." There was not a dry eye among the watching family members. Even the youngest great-grandchildren seemed to sense the importance of the moment, the weight of 50 years of love and commitment being reaffirmed. That night, there was a feast and celebration that lasted until the stars came out. There was music and dancing, with James and Rebecca taking the first dance as everyone watched and clapped. They moved slowly, carefully, but with the same connection they had always shared. 50 years, Rebecca whispered as they swayed to the music. "Can you believe it?" "Feels like 50 minutes and 50 lifetimes all at once," James replied. "I remember everything, Becca. Every moment, every day, it has all been precious." The years after their 50th anniversary were gentler, quieter. James and Rebecca had fully retired now, turning the ranch over to Thomas and his son while they enjoyed their remaining years in the comfort of the homestead they had built together. They spent their days doing simple things. Tending a small garden, sitting on the porch watching the world go by, visiting with grandchildren and great-grandchildren who came by regularly. Rebecca quilted and told stories to anyone who would listen. James carved wooden toys for the little ones and offered advice to Thomas and his grandson when they asked for it. But mostly, they just enjoyed being together. After more than 5 decades of marriage, they had earned the right to slow down, to savor each moment rather than rushing through life. On warm afternoons, they still sometimes rode out to the river where they had met. James had to help Rebecca mount and dismount now, and they rode slowly, but they still made the journey. They would sit on the bank, holding hands, remembering the people they had been and marveling at the people they had become. "Do you have any regrets?" James asked one afternoon in 1928 as they sat by the flowing water. It was the same question Rebecca had asked him years before, and she considered it carefully. "Only that I did not meet you sooner," she finally said. "Think of all the years we missed." "We had the years we were supposed to have," James said, "and we made the most of every single one." "That we did," Rebecca agreed. In the fall of 1929, as the stock market crashed and the country plunged into economic depression, James became ill. It started as a simple cold but developed into pneumonia. Despite the best care the family could provide, he grew weaker. Rebecca sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, talking to him, reminding him of all the good times they had shared. Their children and grandchildren came to say goodbye, filling the homestead with love and tears. On an October evening, as the sun set over the land he had worked for so many years, James Carpenter passed away peacefully with Rebecca holding his hand. His last words were simple and perfect. "I love you, Becca. Thank you for everything." Rebecca felt like her heart had been torn from her chest. After 54 years together, after building a life and a family and a legacy, she was alone again. The grief was crushing, overwhelming, as terrible in its way as the grief she had felt when her father died. But this time, she was not alone by a river with no one to help her. This time, she was surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who loved her. This time, she had a lifetime of memories to sustain her, a legacy that would continue, a love that death could not erase. The funeral was attended by more than 200 people. James had been respected and loved throughout the territory, known for his integrity, his skill with animals, and his devotion to his family. Person after person came to tell Rebecca how James had helped them, advised them, been a friend when they needed one. Rebecca listened to all the stories, and through her grief, she felt a fierce pride. James had lived a good life, a meaningful life. He had made a difference in the world, and he had loved her with everything he had until the very last moment. In the months after James's death, Rebecca struggled to find her footing. Everything reminded her of him. The empty chair at the table, the unused side of the bed, the silence where his voice should have been. She missed him with an ache that never quite went away. But slowly, with the help of her family, she learned to carry the grief without being crushed by it. She learned to remember James with joy rather than just sadness, to celebrate the incredible gift of their 54 years together, rather than focusing solely on the fact that those years were over. Thomas and his family insisted that Rebecca stay at the homestead, that it was her home as much as theirs. She agreed gratefully, glad to remain in the place where she and James had built their life together. She spent her remaining years quilting, gardening, and telling stories to great-grandchildren who gathered around her chair to listen. She told them about James, about the day they met by the river, about how he had saved her with his presence and his patience. She told them about building the ranch, about the struggles and triumphs, about what real love looked like. "Your great-grandfather was the best man I ever knew," she would tell them. "He found me when I was broken and helped me put myself back together. He loved me when I did not think I could be loved. He built a life with me that was bigger and better than anything I could have dreamed. That is what love should be. Not perfect, not easy, but real and lasting and worth every challenge." The great-grandchildren absorbed her stories, carrying them forward into their own lives. The legend of James and Rebecca became family lore, a standard to aspire to, an example of what marriage could be at its best. Rebecca lived until 1934, passing away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 79. She was buried beside James in the small cemetery on the homestead, under a headstone that read, "Rebecca Morgan Carpenter. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother." She built a life of love that will never be forgotten. At her funeral, her oldest grandchild, James, stood to speak. He was 50 years old now, the same age his grandfather had been when his grandmother died. He looked out at the assembled family, more than 100 people spanning 4 generations, all gathered to honor the woman who had been the heart of their family. "My grandmother used to tell us the story of how she and my grandfather met," he began. "How she had lost everything and thought her life was over. How he found her crying by the river and sat beside her, not saying a word, just being present. She said that silence spoke volumes, that it told her she was not alone, that there was still hope. That is what Grandma and Grandpa gave us. Hope. They showed us that even in the darkest times, love can find you. They showed us that with hard work and commitment and faith, you can build something lasting. They showed us what it means to truly love someone, not just in the good times but through everything life throws at you." The ranch we are standing on, this family that surrounds us, all of this exists because one cowboy decided to stop when he heard gunshots, to follow a grieving woman to make sure she was all right, to sit beside her in silence and just be present. One act of compassion became a lifetime of love, and that love created all of this. He gestured to the crowd, to the homestead, to the land that stretched out around them. This is their legacy, not just the ranch or the money or the property. But this family, these relationships, this understanding of what really matters in life. Grandma and Grandpa taught us that love is the most important thing. That being there for each other, supporting each other, staying together through hard times, that is what creates a life worth living. So as we say goodbye to Grandma today, let's not just mourn. Let's celebrate. Celebrate a life well lived, a love that lasted more than 50 years, a legacy that will continue through all of us and our children and their children. Grandma and Grandpa are together again now, and I think that would make them both very happy. As the family gathered after the service, sharing memories and comforting each other, the sun began to set over the homestead. The light turned golden, bathing everything in a warm glow that felt almost magical, and if you had been standing by the river at that moment, in the place where a cowboy once found a woman crying and sat beside her in silence, you might have felt something. A presence, perhaps. Or just a sense of peace, of rightness, of a story that had come full circle. The river still flowed, as it always had and always would. The cottonwood still bent over the water. The land still stretched out under the endless New Mexico sky. And somewhere in that timeless landscape, the echo of a love story lingered. A story about grief and hope, about endings and beginnings, about a moment of compassion that changed two lives forever. James had found Rebecca crying by the river. He had sat beside her and let the silence say everything. And from that silence had grown a love that transcended time, a family that would carry their legacy forward, and a lesson that would be passed down through generations. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be present, to sit beside someone in their darkness and let them know they are not alone. That was the gift James gave Rebecca all those years ago. And it was the gift they both gave to everyone who came after them, the gift of presence, the gift of patience, the gift of love that endures beyond death itself. The homestead still stands today, now in its 5th generation of family ownership. The cattle still graze on the hills, children still play in the yard. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, family members walk down to the river where it all began, sitting on the bank and thinking about James and Rebecca, about the love they shared and the legacy they left. The story is told and retold, changing slightly with each telling but always maintaining its essential truth. That love can find you in your darkest moment, that one act of kindness can change everything, and that sometimes the most profound things cannot be said with words at all. Sometimes silence says everything, and sometimes a cowboy finding a woman crying by the river is not just an ending, but the beginning of something beautiful that will last forever.